Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras at Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. An 8-part documentary series called Labeled is the brainchild of 3 New Mexico State University Creative Institute professors who hope to sell the series to major television networks and take the documentaries into Las Cruces schools to help the public gain a better understanding of mental illness. Ross Marks, Mitch Fowler, and Sherwin Lau, CMI assistant professors in the College of Arts and Sciences, researched the series for the last few years, conducting dozens of interviews with people in Las Cruces living with mental illness, as well as the professionals who work with them. Here is a preview of the series.
It was Christmas Eve of 1990.
And we were driving back to Truth or Consequences to have Christmas Eve at my parents' house.
And he said we were going to take a short drive, and we went up to Elephant Butte.
Drove onto the dam, parked in the middle, and I got out and asked her to get out of the truck.
And he lifted me up and put me on the side of the dam.
While she's sitting there on the top, on the side, looking down.
And he said, I have this really important question to ask you. He says, will you give me a son one day? And then he got down on one knee and asked me if I would marry him.
It seems like after 9/11, we sat down at the dinner table one night and talked to the kids that I'm gonna get called away.
Growing up, my dad was never gone. I just didn't want that for my family, to see their dad always being gone. Little did I know he would still be gone, but not in that same capacity.
He was in Iraq for 16 months.
Being gone so long and coming back, I was hoping for the best, that everything would just fall right back into place like it would be before I left.
My mom had told me and my brother when he came back that he was going to have trouble adjusting back to civilian life.
I knew it from the minute I hugged him, that this guy's different.
Like one of those things where I tried to hide it. If you know somebody has something, you're gonna look at them different.
It was almost like some of the light had burnt out.
Like he didn't know who he was. There you go.
Ross Marks is a CMI assistant professor in the College of Arts and Sciences. He is our guest today on Fronteras at Changing America. Professor Marks, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's start out this conversation by asking you, how did you first get involved with the series? How did this series come together?
In 2007, I was diagnosed myself with bipolar disorder. So it's mental illness became very personal to me. Obviously, it wasn't something that just happened overnight, but I'd had struggles my whole life, and then finally I'd been misdiagnosed, and I had a real battle for me and my family, my wife, my children, my extended family. Was very fortunate that I had a great psychiatrist and work with me and help me get medication. So I've been really passionate as a filmmaker and as someone who's struggled with mental illness on how do I put the two together. I went to see a performance of a stage show called Minds Interrupted at the Rio Grande Theater. And what Minds Interrupted is a group of people whose lives were affected by mental illness got up on stage with a monologue and told their story. And I went to the Rio Grande, it was sold out, there were 450 people there, and that night 450 people's lives were changed, including my own and my wife who was with me. And I sat in the audience and I thought, number one, the people on stage who are talking about mental illness are much braver than I am, because I don't think I could do what they were doing. But then I also felt an obligation and a calling. I said, as a filmmaker, and I've won many awards as a director, and I've directed several feature films, and as someone whose life is affected by mental illness on a very intimate and personal level, I felt the need to take that stage show and turn it into a film, turn it into a documentary. The great thing about film And television is, on stage you reach hundreds of people in the audience, but with film you reach millions. So I felt the calling. I said, here I am, a filmmaker who has a mental illness. This is my true calling right now, is to take this stage show and turn it into a documentary. And that was really the inspiration for it. And this was probably about 3 years ago, and have been working and planning. Coincidentally, at that same time, Senator Mary Kay Papin, who knew of my battle with mental illness and my passion for it, had asked me, she said, you know what, the stigma of mental illness is so colossal and people are so afraid to talk about it. What can we do? What can you do, Ross, to help this? And I said, I just saw a stage show. I said, if we can turn that into a film, we can positively impact millions and millions of lives and reduce the stigma of mental illness by humanizing it. And that was kind of how Labeled began. And Senator Papin, along with State Representative Jeff Steinborn and Bill McCamley, gave us some state appropriations, some capital outlay money, and that allowed us to start shooting the documentary.
It's fascinating how these ideas are born and that personal connection that you have. Tell me, when you first started pitching this idea around to your co-workers and other people, how was it received? Was it received with a pleasant surprise of like, wow, I never thought that mental illness needed to be discussed in such an open way?
It's the dialogue on mental illness sadly begins typically when there's an act of violence. You have a mass shooting, or you have a dangerous episode, and the media picks up on that and says mental illness, mental illness. So we very rarely have these positive conversations about how you do deal with mental illness. And people who have a mental illness, myself included, and people that I've met with and interviewed, they're afraid to talk about it because of the stigma. You say to somebody, I have a mental illness, they retreat, they run away. They don't reach out to you and say, how can I help you? I'm there for you. So we're trying to, when I began the project, I had the process of coming out myself and sharing with other people why I want to do it, how it's so personal to me and my family. And I knew that I needed a talented editor. I knew that I needed a talented cinematographer, director of photography. Fortunately, the most talented people I know are right here at New Mexico State's campus at the Creative Media Institute. So I immediately went to Sherwin Lau and said, Sherwin, this is a project that I want to do. Would you please get involved from an editing and producing standpoint? He said that he would. I met with Mitch Fowler and asked him the same. I've worked with both Mitch and Sherwin before on a number of other projects. So we just kind of naturally came together and decided we would tackle this fairly big challenge. It's such a vast subject that we initially think we'd do a 2-hour documentary, and then we realized this is just too big for a mere 2 hours, so we've expanded it to an 8-episode series where each episode is going to be 1 hour and deal with a different type of mental illness.
Tell me, in reaching out to people to talk about this, how challenging was that to get people to openly talk about mental illness and the stigma that comes with mental illness?
We've met with dozens and dozens of people and told them we want to tell their story. Again, the goal of Labeled, the documentary that we're doing, the episodic documentary, is to reduce the stigma of mental illness by humanizing it, by putting a face to the label and showing the public, showing the people that see the documentary, that mental illness is much more than a label. It's much more than a condition. These are human beings with challenges and struggles, and it's no different than somebody who may have a life-threatening illness like cancer, or somebody that may have a different type of injury. It's really a challenge, and how we overcome these challenges. People with mental illness. Initially, when it's funny, when we talk to somebody and say we want to tell your story, there would be some reluctance. Well, I don't know if I want to be on camera. I don't know if I want to talk about this. And what I would do is I would reach out to them and say, you know what, I have a mental illness myself, and I understand what you're going through. I have a connection to you because of it. We share this thing in common. We have to tell our stories if we're going to allow people to understand what mental illness is all about, what the struggle is all about, and how we overcome the stigma. So I think the fact that I had this in common with them made them immediately comfortable. So for example, the first episode that we're doing right now is on PTSD. And we're working with a family right here in Las Cruces who's graciously and courageously opened their lives up to us. And the father, who is the one who has PTSD, was very reluctant. And when we first started a project, I don't want to do it, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to do it, I don't want to talk about it. And then one day we set up a meeting with the wife and the daughter, and then in walked the father. And I thought, wow, I thought he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And he sat down, he says, well, I'm considering it. Tell me why I should do this and open up my life to you. And I said to him, I said, look, I haven't told you this, but I have a mental illness myself. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I know about the stigma. I know about the fear of sharing this information. I'm sharing with you, and because I hope that you'll share with me. And I think he immediately felt comfortable. And the title, Labeled, really came from him, because he said, I want you to know one thing. And I said, what's that? He says, I am much more than a label. I am not defined by my post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, it's a challenge, it's something I'm overcoming, but it's not who I am. And that's when the title came to me. I said, you know what, this is not about labels, this is about human beings.
Now, you come from this from a personal experience. In your early years, through your teenage years, and maybe through your 20s, did you have any idea that you suffered from any kind of depression, manic depression, bipolar disorder, or is this something that came later in your life?
Bipolar disorder is typically marked by periods of extreme high energy, which we call mania, and then followed by, or sometimes preceded by, depression. I've never suffered terribly from depression, but I've dealt with mania my whole life, and quite frankly, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of it's like a great big party.
Especially if you're in the creative field.
Yeah. So in high school, we knew something was wrong. I went to get counseling. I was kind of misdiagnosed with ADHD and hyperactivity disorder,
which is fairly common when it comes to the mental disorders.
Right. So I was started taking medication. Even went through college and graduate school, and then as a young adult working in the entertainment industry, like you said, there was almost a creative advantage to having the mania, that kind of extra fuel to drive you. But of course, the mania also leads to kind of reckless thinking and dangerous behavior, which is I also suffered from myself with some of my decision making and some of the actions that I took. But the challenge, one of the problems with mental illness, one of the great challenges is there's no test. You can't take a blood test. You can't take an x-ray and a doctor says, that's what it is. I see what it is. So it's difficult to diagnose. And then it's even more difficult because people don't want to be diagnosed with a mental illness, so they don't seek treatment. They don't get help because they don't want to know what they're afraid is the great truth, that they have this brain disorder.
And it comes with being labeled as having this brain disorder. How challenging is it for the people as you interview them in discussing the stigma that comes with it? Because for many of these people, and we did a series here at KRWG called Latinos and Mental Health, where we discussed stigma being a big issue among Latinos who come from a culture where mental illness is not an option. It's not discussed. You either hide it or you self-medicate.
Well, the family we're working with right now, we're just finishing up the first episode with PTSD. The gentleman is a former military, which is how he got the PTSD, and he's a Hispanic male. And in his household and in his family and in his culture, you didn't have a mental illness. That meant you were weak. That meant there was something wrong with you. So the last thing in the world you would ever do is seek out that treatment. So he resisted getting treatment and getting counseling because it was an admission that he was weak, and he can't afford to be weak because it would be an attack on his manhood. And so I think that the toughest thing for someone with mental illness to do is reach out and say, I need help. I can't deal with this on my own. Hopefully they have a supportive family. Hopefully they have a network of friends and coworkers that are there and support them. I was, like I said, I was very, very blessed that my wife and her family embraced me and said, we want to help you, we want to get you treatment, we want to get you medication, we want to get you to the best person you can be. And like I said, I'm doing very well today. I've directed several feature films, I've won awards, I'm doing the documentary, I teach full-time at the university, so I'm incredibly successful and productive. The gentleman whose family we're profiling has his own construction business, incredibly successful. So part of what I want Labeled to be is I want it to be a series about hope, a series that this isn't about just the dangers and the challenges of mental illness. It's also about people that are like you and me and are successful and productive members of society.
What have you learned from producing this series? Anything new? Anything that's revealing, that surprised you, that you weren't aware of before?
The thing that I knew this to be true, but that's confirmed it, is you can't overcome the challenge of a mental illness alone. You really do need the support of your family, you need the support of your friends, of your coworkers, and of mental health professionals. And you have to kind of surrender yourself to the group and say, can you lift me up a little bit? Can you carry me a little bit? Can I lean on you at times of weakness? So, and with the documentary, we're hoping to reach out. We've partnered with Doña Ana County, we've partnered with the city of Las Cruces, because we want it to be a teaching tool, particularly to get into the schools where young people may be dealing with these issues. You know, New Mexico's got one of the highest teen suicide rates in the country, and a lot of that is due to, I think, people not knowing how to react to depression, how to deal with the challenges that come with and precede suicide. So if we show the documentary in the schools, if we show the documentary at mental health care facilities, and people understand they're not alone, there are other people with these same challenges. 1 in 4 people's lives are affected by mental illness, so it's a very common situation.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Explain better how that works, that 1 in 4 people are impacted by mental health.
Well, the statistics are 25% of our population are affected by mental illness. It may be that you are not that person who has a mental illness, but it could be someone in your family, it could be a relative, but 1 in 4 people's lives are directly affected by mental illness. So, for example, in my family, there's myself. Going back on my father's side, there were several people who also had bipolar disorder. So, you know, I have an immediate connection to it, and my family has a connection. But you talk to anybody, and they'll say, yes, my brother, yes, my in-law, yes, you know, so they're...
And that's one of the things, again, in the discovery phase that we had in the Latinos in Mental Health, is that a lot of the people we talked to were like, we think my grandfather had bipolar disorder. We think they might have suffered through depression, but they just never talked about it and literally took it with them to the grave. And a lot of them are wanting to discover what they can learn more about mental disorders.
Right, and that's why I said the goal, the primary goal of Labeled, the documentary, is to open up the dialogue on mental illness, to give people the courage and the strength and the confidence to reach out for help. Hopefully someone will see the documentary and they'll say, you know what, I think maybe I'm suffering, or you know what, I think my spouse is suffering, or I think my brother, or I think my neighbor, and to reach out to them and say, hey, I saw this documentary, because as part of the documentary, we're going to give guidance and assistance and where people can go for help. We've partnered with NAMI, the National Association for Mental Illness, and we're working very closely with them on a consulting basis. So we want people to see the documentary and reach out to people that may need some assistance and be there for them in a caring, sympathetic, and supportive way.
You have a big vision for this.
Yes, I do.
You don't want it to just stay in Las Cruces. Tell me what your goal is, aside from educating viewers, but what is your big picture for the documentary series?
Big picture, right now there's a number of fabulous documentaries that air on Showtime, on HBO, on a number of the television networks. So it's our hope, and we've already got some interest from one of the major cable channels, that this will air on a national basis on one of the channels, HBO or Showtime, as part of a series, so that we'll have the widest reach possible. Like I said, I have a management company who represents me as a director. They went out with the documentary, said we have a client who's doing an episodic documentary on mental illness. Is there some interest? We sent them some written information, kind of a treatment, and they said, we're very interested in the project. We're in a great situation in that we have the ability and the financing to go ahead and make this. We don't have to wait for somebody to say, please give us money. We're going. Like I said, the first episode will open the J. Paul Taylor Symposium in March. We're ready at work on the second episode. So we're making this series, and the expectation and the hope is it's going to be on a major cable channel, hopefully in the late spring.
Tell me about what kind of impact you wanted to have on a local level in the Las Cruces community.
You know, I went to the Tough Enough to Wear Pink football game. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, this is fabulous. We've got our football team wearing pink uniforms. We're raising millions of dollars for cancer. And I just think that the dialogue and the awareness and the attention that the city of Las Cruces has given cancer was really inspirational for me. And my goal and my hope is that we can have that same type of dialogue, that same type of attention, that same type of support in Las Cruces for mental illness. That's my goal.
Are there any stories that you have conducted, any of the interviews that have had an impact on you?
There was one family we were talking with who was affected by schizophrenia, and they had a very tragic incident associated with it. And I was hopeful that the family would share their story with us on camera as a way of reaching out to millions of people on the importance of why mental illness has to be treated, on why people have to take medication, on why we need to support and love and care for and empathize with people with mental illness. Sadly, the family decided it would be too difficult, understandably, to share their story and said, you know what, we're going to decline participating in the documentary. But when they declined it, it got me more enthusiastic about it, because I said it's not that the documentary is going to prevent mental illness, but what it can prevent is the tragedy associated with mental illness. If you have a child and they're suffering from depression, they're suffering from bipolar and schizophrenia, and rather than sticking them in a special education class, or rather than kind of getting angry at your child, if you can reach out and understand them and get them the right treatment and get them the right medication, you can save lives. Like I said, I'm an example. The family we're working with now in PTSD, I'd say on the 8 episodes that we're doing, the 8 families affected by mental illness, I'd say 6 out of the 8 are success stories, productive, effective people who are really contributing in a great way to society and overcoming the challenge of mental illness. So it can be done, but you have to have the right support and the right treatment, and that's what I hope this documentary is able to create.
How do you hope to involve local schools to get the word out to some of these high schools? Are you working with the local school districts on this?
Like I said, we've got the Doña Ana County and the City of Las Cruces have contributed to our budget and are sponsoring, co-producing, as it were, the documentary, so that we can use it as a teaching tool, so that we can take the documentary, go into a classroom, have kids watch mental illness, say, hey, I think I'm struggling with this, I need to talk to my parents or a teacher or to a mental health professional, or I think my father is going through this, or my mother or my aunt or my uncle. Just create that awareness and stimulate a conversation.
Serve as an awakening.
Correct.
For these kids who might be impacted, but they're not aware that this is what's happening.
Right. So we want to use it as a teaching tool going into schools. We want to use it as a teaching tool where we can go into clinics and institutions. And the hardest thing about mental illness, I think, is suffering alone, suffering in silence. So if we can tell people that you can share and ask for help, and people will respond and give you that help, then I think the documentary will be successful.
So it's called Labeled. You did it in 8 parts, and you're looking to launch it nationwide through one of the cable networks. What additional work do you have to do to make this happen? Where are you at right now?
We're just about done with the first episode. As I said, it's on post-traumatic stress disorder. So we've done probably 20 hours of interviews, probably another 30, 40 hours of what's called B-roll, where you're just the camera's unobtrusively following the family, living their lives, so that the documentary is more dynamic than just
So this
a
is
talking
like
head.
this is serious business, because that kind of production going into it is really a big time commitment.
Oh, very much so. Very. It's like I said, I've directed 4 feature films. I've probably done 10 music videos, 10, 15 short films. You know, and this is going to take up 3 to 4 years of my life. It's going to be a much bigger time commitment than any project I've ever done. But at the same time, it's going to have a greater impact, and the importance of it is much higher than any project I've ever done.
In wrapping up the conversation, as a professor at New Mexico State University, have you gotten students involved with the project?
That's very much the goal of the project, and that was why when I first met with Senator Papin, I said, you know, I want to do it at New Mexico State University, so that not only are we making a documentary, but we're also providing an educational experience for our students. So the crew for the film, with the exception of Mitch Fowler, who's our director of photography and a fellow faculty member, the crew is largely students at New Mexico State University. So the great thing about that is they'll work on a professional television series, and they'll graduate with a credit on their resume working on a professional television series, which makes them more employable in the real world. So rather than just having a college degree, they also have professional credits on the resume.
Professor Ross Marks, thank you very much for being on Fronteras, Changing America. I want to wish you the best of luck as you move forward with this project.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Fronteras, Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez.